She said she needed someone who made her feel alive. 24 years of loyalty, 2 kids, and not one regret until that moment. I let her go, but I didn't forget the people who smiled as I disappeared. Karen left me on a Tuesday. She didn't cry, didn't yell, just stood in the middle of the kitchen we remodeled together and said, "I'm moving out. I'm with someone else." No build-up, no warning. 24 years of marriage, undone between 2 sips of coffee. "He makes me feel something I haven't felt in years," she said. I just stared at her. The words didn't land all at once. They came like frostbite, numb at first, then sharp. His name was Travis. She told me like it was a formality, like I deserved to know but shouldn't ask anything else. I didn't. "He's younger," she said. Like I couldn't guess. I was 50. Travis was 29. Tech startup type. Full of charisma and borrowed language from business podcasts. Polite, I'll give him that. When she introduced us, yes, she actually brought him to the house 2 days later. He shook my hand and said, "Doug, I've heard so much about you." He looked like the kind of guy who tailors his smile to the room. Friendly, even warm, but blank behind the eyes. Not cruel, just transactional. She moved out a week after that. Said it was amicable. Said she wanted to keep things civil. Said we could evolve into something healthier. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just nodded and let her walk out. They thought I was done. That's exactly what I needed them to think. We had a good life, or at least I thought we did. Retirement had come early for me, not by accident. I worked contracts for large HVAC distributors, built relationships, played the long game. I didn't build apps or chase IPOs. I built trust. Over 2 decades, I became the guy people called when they needed something done clean, quiet, and smart. When I stepped away at 47, I'd set us up to coast. House paid off, club membership secured, 2 boys through college. I thought I'd earned a slow life. Karen didn't want slow. She wanted alive, as she put it. That word stuck in my ribs for weeks. The first few months after she left, I let people think I was licking my wounds. Maybe I was. I stopped going to the country club, skipped the spring fundraiser. Neighbors would wave, but it was that cautious kind of sympathy, like I was contagious. Truth was, I didn't mind being invisible. It gave me a freedom I hadn't felt in years. Travis wasn't just a fling. He was a project. I could see that even from a distance. Karen had always had a way of making people. That was her real gift. She'd helped turn a sleepy local nonprofit into a regional name. Volunteered at galas, backed the right causes, hosted dinners where she made mid-level city officials feel like royalty. Now she was pouring all of that into him. I watched from a distance as she remade him. He launched a consultancy, something vague about sales systems and digital conversion. One of those business models that sounds good over drinks, but folds the second you ask for a profit margin. Didn't matter. Karen had connections, and he knew how to parrot the lingo. They got invited to everything. Fundraisers, interviews, board dinners. She introduced him to people I used to do quiet favors for, city developers, corporate buyers, a few state-level folks with long memories. He gave a TEDx talk called Young Minds, Old Rules. Said we were living in a trust economy. I watched the video in my garage, sipping a glass of scotch. He had that smooth delivery, like he believed everything he was saying. Maybe he did, but I saw it. The cracks. The way he name-dropped the wrong person once. The way he mispronounced Raleigh in front of a mayor. The way he laughed too loud when he didn't get the joke. He was charming, but thin. All surface. Karen either didn't see it or didn't care. She was too busy showing him off. And people loved it. Karen looks so happy these days. Someone told me at the hardware store, like I was supposed to be proud. Now and then, old acquaintances would reach out, softly, cautiously. One sent me a link to an interview Travis did in Triangle Business Weekly, smiling next to Karen with a quote about how mentorship is more important than legacy. Another messaged me to say he saw my ex at a private wine event, cozying up to the CFO of a firm I used to advise. "Hope you're doing okay, man," he added. I responded with a thumbs up. Truth was, I was doing okay. I was taking walks every morning, catching up with my sons, without asking them to take sides, making calls, having lunches, the kind of lunches that don't show up on social media. I was invisible, but I was also listening, because in the world I used to move in, looks don't matter. Charm fades. What counts are relationships, quiet ones. And while Karen was busy introducing Travis to everyone she knew, I was paying attention to who still whispered my name when they needed a favor. It wasn't all strategy. There were hard nights. Nights where I sat on the porch and stared at her empty chair. Nights I asked myself how I didn't see it coming. How long it had been rotting underneath the surface. But every time I felt the pull toward bitterness, I reminded myself, silence is power. Let them laugh. Let them rise. Because I knew something they didn't. Connections are like bank accounts. And some people don't realize what they've overdrafted until the lights go out. I didn't fight the divorce. Not out loud. Karen filed. I signed. But I didn't forget the way she flipped the papers over like they were a restaurant check, tapping the pen like she had somewhere better to be. I didn't shout. I didn't throw anything. I just watched her sign the last page with the same expression she might use crossing a name off a grocery list. Focused, unbothered, efficient. That's what hurt the most, really. Not the leaving. Not even the younger man. It was how little I seemed to matter in the moment she made it final. She moved fast. Moved in with Travis before the ink dried. And within a few weeks, she had a new set of photos on her social media. Her and Travis at some tech mixer. Her and Travis at brunch with smiling strangers in stiff blazers. Her and Travis standing in front of some startup launch banner with words like innovation and growth plastered across a rented backdrop. If the divorce had been a breakup, the way she promoted her new life made it feel more like a rebrand. And it wasn't just for show. She still had pull, real pull. She knew how to call in favors, how to get people to take meetings they wouldn't normally take, how to make a young man with no real experience look like he belonged at a table full of decision makers. That made her dangerous, not because she was cruel, but because she was capable. The day after our settlement cleared, I got a call from a local real estate lawyer I'd once helped get out of a brutal municipal zoning contract. He didn't call to offer condolences. He just said, "You free for lunch this week?" So I went. It was an easy conversation, mostly about people we both used to work with. But near the end, he asked if I'd looked at the vendor list for the county's new infrastructure bids. I hadn't. He slid a printout across the table. "Look who's trying to play grown-up," he said. Third name down. Veritas Edge Solutions, Travis Bennett. I didn't say a word. I just nodded and folded the paper into my jacket. That lunch told me everything I needed to know. Travis wasn't just Karen's boyfriend. He was officially stepping into rooms I used to walk through with ease. Rooms I helped build. And now he was in them because of her, because she handed him the key and smiled like she'd done something noble. I didn't go on a revenge tour. I didn't start scheming or yelling into the void. I did what I always did when I felt a shift coming. I paid attention. I went back to the club twice a week, mornings mostly, when the regulars were still half asleep. I sat in my usual chair. Black coffee. No paper. Just listening. I overheard two guys from a private contractor firm talking about a pitch Travis made. Confident, one of them said, but completely missed the real cost structure. The other one laughed and said, he used the word synergy 6 times. Said we needed to be more frictionless. What the hell does that even mean? They didn't see me. They wouldn't have cared if they had. That was fine. I wanted to be invisible. I took more meetings after that. I didn't call them work. I still don't. They were just lunches, coffees, the occasional quiet dinner with someone who remembered how I used to get things done. Nobody asked about Karen. If they brought up Travis, it was usually with the same cautious tone you use when someone's nephew wants a job he isn't qualified for. They weren't cruel, just skeptical. One of the city contractors she used to cozy up to, Jeff, a quiet guy who never smiled unless he meant it, started calling me before returning Travis's messages. He didn't say why, and I didn't press. I never told him not to work with Travis. I just made sure he had better options. Safer ones. Smarter ones. Ones with fewer holes in the cost estimates and more realistic delivery timelines. Jeff started referring to Travis's proposals as theoretical exercises. I kept showing up, not as a force, but as a fixture. People like Travis move fast, but people like me? We stay. We become furniture in rooms where decisions are made. I didn't need attention. I needed proximity. Karen called once in December, just before Christmas. Said she hoped I wasn't spending it alone. I said I wasn't. That was true. My youngest flew in from Boulder, and we drank too much scotch and watched bad movies like we used to. She mentioned Travis in passing. He's been really busy, she said, like it was an apology or a complaint. She didn't sound as bright as she used to. There was a small pause when I didn't reply, and she filled it by telling me they were flying out to Atlanta soon to meet with a group of investors. She said it like she needed me to be impressed. I told her I hoped the flights weren't delayed. She paused again, then said, "You sound good, Doug. Better than I expected." "I've been staying busy," I said, and that was it. No questions about what I was doing. No apology for how fast she'd moved on. Just polite distance. She hung up first. That winter, I started running into more familiar faces, some at the club, some in town, a few even at events I wasn't invited to but managed to show up for anyway. I didn't make a big impression. I didn't wear expensive suits or smile too wide. I just listened, asked questions, made it clear I still understood how the backrooms worked. And when someone mentioned Travis's company in a meeting, I didn't object. I didn't warn anyone. I just asked if they'd done due diligence. I let the silence do the rest. I wasn't angry anymore. That part was over. What I felt now wasn't grief or bitterness. It was something cleaner. Purpose, maybe. Direction. I wasn't fixing my life. I was building a new one, quietly, one conversation at a time. I kept my tone neutral, my posture calm, my smile even. I said little, but I showed up where it counted. I let Karen and Travis believe they had moved past me. I let them believe I was done. And then I started keeping track of every room they walked into, because most of those rooms still had a door I once installed. It was the canceled dinner that caught my attention. Not mine, Travis's. A contact in state procurement, Harold, mentioned over lunch that Travis had a meeting lined up with a few economic directors out in Charlotte. Karen had arranged it, no doubt. She was still using her name like a passkey, getting him into rooms he never would have found on his own. But then the meeting got rescheduled. Harold didn't offer a reason, and I didn't ask. He just said, "It was suggested from above that we hold off." When I raised an eyebrow, he smiled and took another sip of his iced tea. I didn't press him. I didn't need to. The cracks weren't big yet, but they were starting to show. Another friend in logistics mentioned that Travis's firm had pitched a system upgrade for their regional distribution portal. Said the proposal looked polished, nice graphics, good talking points, but the back end didn't make sense. Too many assumptions, no clear plan for integration. They passed. Quietly, politely, but they passed. I started hearing versions of the same story in different places. At the club, at city breakfasts, at back table lunches where the real deals were still happening. It was never a full-blown rejection, just a step back. A hesitation. An excuse to delay. People who used to say, "Let's meet with him next week," were now saying, "We'll circle back when the timing feels right." I didn't say a word about it to anyone, but I paid attention to who was backing away and why. That's when Karen called. Not to catch up. Not to apologize. She went straight into it. Said Travis was having trouble getting traction with a few of the proposals they'd been working on. Said the responses were different now. Colder. Less enthusiastic. She wanted to know if I'd heard anything. I told her I hadn't. I let the silence hang until she broke it. Doors that used to open just don't. Her voice didn't sound worried. It sounded confused. Like she was trying to understand how momentum disappeared without a sound. I didn't answer right away. I let her sit with it. Eventually, she said, "Did you tell anyone not to work with him?" "No," I said. "I haven't told anyone anything." That was the truth. I hadn't told a single person not to work with Travis. I just made sure they had better options. A week later, Travis gave a speech at a leadership breakfast. I made sure to be there. I didn't sit close. I picked a seat 3 rows from the back, off to the side, where I could see the whole room. He walked in wearing one of those tailored suits that cost more than a used car, smiled big for the cameras, and opened with a joke about how agility matters more than age these days. It landed with a few laughs. Nervous ones. The kind people give when they're not sure if they're being insulted. The rest of his speech was full of catchphrases. Strategic alignment, modular innovation, disruptive efficiency. It was like listening to a corporate horoscope. I looked around. A few people were nodding, but most were checked out, scrolling their phones or whispering under their breath. Then came the stumble. A question from the audience about his firm's capacity to scale for state-level implementation. Travis started answering, then paused. You could see the flicker of panic as he reached for the next phrase. His words got tangled. For just a second, he froze. He recovered. Kind of, but the moment was there. The man next to me, someone from a civic infrastructure committee, glanced at me. We didn't say anything. We didn't need to. After the speech, I stood in the lobby talking to a former client of mine, a director from the regional planning board. We kept it casual. Sports, weather, retirement. Travis passed by. He saw me mid-conversation, and his smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He looked over my shoulder, noticed who I was standing with, and that was when the mask cracked. Just a little. Just enough. He realized I hadn't disappeared, that I was still standing in rooms he thought he now owned. "Doug," he said, "didn't know you were still active." I shook his hand. "Not really. Just staying in the loop." He tried to laugh, but it was thin. The kind of sound people make when they're not sure what they've just walked into. I didn't linger. I went back to my conversation. Travis stood there a moment longer, then drifted off, glancing back once as he did. That night, Karen was at the same event. I saw her across the room talking with a local councilman. Her smile looked forced. Her posture had changed, tighter, more careful. She caught my eye for a moment. Just long enough. I didn't look away. She still had influence. Enough to make things happen. Enough to put Travis on a stage, even if the floor was crumbling beneath him. That made her dangerous. She wasn't irrelevant yet, but she had hitched herself to someone who couldn't deliver, and the people who once opened doors for her were starting to question her judgment. The week after that, Travis's firm was pulled from a shortlist for a multi-year state tech initiative. The contract would have tied him into public funds for 5 years, guaranteed income, exposure, stability. If that deal had gone through, he'd have been bulletproof. But it didn't. They passed. Quietly. Politely. But they passed. I didn't hear it from Karen. I heard it from one of the review board members over drinks at a small gathering in Durham. He said, "The numbers looked good, but no one could figure out who was actually doing the work. It felt like smoke." I nodded. Sometimes smoke means something's cooking. Sometimes it means the fire already came through. He smiled. "Well, either way, we're not biting." By the end of that month, I didn't need to ask questions. People were offering answers. Not to me directly, just in passing. Whatever happened to that guy? He came in hot, but then she backed the wrong horse. I let it wash over me. The shift wasn't loud. There were no headlines. But it was real. He was losing ground. Not from one big mistake, but from 100 small cuts. Meetings missed. Confidence shaken. Rooms suddenly colder. And the best part? He still didn't know where it started. The expo was supposed to be his moment. Travis had spent months dropping hints about it, building anticipation around a major presence for his firm, telling anyone who'd listen that he was speaking on next-generation infrastructure. Karen had even name-dropped it at a fundraiser in May, saying they were preparing something big. But by the time the event arrived, Travis's name was nowhere on the official schedule. I didn't have to do much to make that happen. The committee chair was someone I helped during a permitting nightmare 3 years ago. When they reached out about needing a reliable closing speaker, someone respected, grounded, neutral, I told them I could step in. No slides, no buzzwords, just substance. They liked that. The audience liked it too. I spoke plainly, gave real examples, talked about projects that worked and why they worked. When I finished, people stood up. Not all at once, but enough. Enough to matter. Travis was sitting near the back. He clapped twice. Slow, restrained, both hands barely touching before they dropped to his lap. His jaw tightened. His eyes didn't move. He didn't say a word. The room he'd been trying to break into had just applauded me without even noticing he was there. I didn't go near him afterward. I didn't need to. I walked off the stage and spent 20 minutes shaking hands. Most were old friends. A few were new names. One of them, a regional procurement manager who'd just taken over for someone retiring, handed me his card and said, "You're the guy we should have been listening to all along." I didn't say anything about Travis. Not then. Not once. Karen approached me after the crowd thinned out. She looked composed. The same practiced grace she always used in public. But there was something off in her voice. She smiled like usual, but it caught at the edges when she said, "You looked comfortable up there." Just for a second, the syllables didn't line up. Like her throat hesitated to say the words. I nodded politely, thanked her. She glanced toward the hallway, opened her mouth like she was about to say more, then closed it again. She wanted something. Not directly, but there was a bead in her eyes, a kind of waiting that I recognized too well. For a moment I wondered if she'd ask for help. Then I realized it wouldn't matter. I wouldn't give it. Not after everything she'd traded away. Her grip on the room was slipping. You could feel it. People still greeted her, but they didn't gather around her the way they used to. One of the board members she'd once helped raise funds for didn't even acknowledge her until she waved. Another excused himself in the middle of her sentence to take a call that never came. She hadn't fallen completely, but her voice didn't carry the weight it once did. When you bet everything on someone else's success and they falter, people stop seeing you as a force and start treating you like a footnote. By then, Travis's problems weren't just whispers. One of his smaller contracts had been terminated quietly, non-performance. Another city department canceled a scheduled pilot with no explanation. A friend on the inside told me the official reason was strategic realignment. I didn't ask who suggested it. I already knew. I hadn't made a call in weeks. I didn't have to. The people I'd helped last year were now the ones deciding who got in the room, and they hadn't forgotten. When they saw his name on a proposal, they didn't argue. They just turned to someone they trusted more. At another panel later that month, I saw Travis outside in the parking lot before the event started. He was on his phone, staring at the screen like he'd typed something and couldn't decide whether to send it. His thumb hovered for a long time. His mouth moved, silent, rehearsing a line or backpedaling through a pitch. He didn't see me watching from across the lot. That same week, I got a call from a contact in Durham who told me Travis's investor group had pulled out of a planned expansion. Apparently, they reviewed the firm's internal structure and didn't like what they saw. The official statement was that the model wasn't scalable. What it really meant was that Travis had built something that only looked solid from a distance. Up close, it was talk and borrowed credibility. Once the shine faded, there was nothing underneath. One of his employees, someone Karen had recommended personally, quietly asked me for a reference. She didn't explain why she was leaving. She didn't have to. I gave her the recommendation. At the next civic event, I was asked to lead a breakout session on vendor selection. I kept it simple. Talked about the importance of choosing firms with a track record, with substance over style, with depth, not just presentation. No names, no direct shots. But I didn't have to spell it out. The room understood. You could see it on their faces. I caught a glimpse of Travis lingering by the entrance afterward. He didn't approach. He was alone. Karen wasn't there this time. He stood near the coffee table, staring at nothing, then walked out before the session ended. He was unraveling. Not dramatically, not with headlines or disgrace. Just slowly, day by day, in small, irreversible steps. He hadn't lost everything. But the climb was over. The doors had stopped opening. The invitations had dried up. People still shook his hand, but their eyes moved past him to someone else. The last time I saw him was outside that same venue, waiting for the valet. He stood alone in the heat, jacket off, phone in hand, pretending to scroll. I walked past him on my way to the car. He looked up. Our eyes met. I nodded. He didn't. He was still waiting for a door to open, and I had already walked through one he could never enter again. Revenge stories on TV always end with a dramatic confrontation. A slammed door. A public humiliation. A face turning white when the trap is revealed. That's not how it works in the real world. In real life, revenge lands quiet. It takes time. It doesn't ask for attention. It just waits until the damage is done and lets them figure out, far too late, who set the fire. I didn't say a word to Travis. Not after the expo. Not at any of the events where he started shrinking into the corners of rooms. Not when he stood by the valet stand that night, pretending to scroll through messages on a phone that wasn't lighting up. I'd already said everything I needed to, just not with words. I started the first move 8 months earlier. Karen had been trying to get Travis positioned on the advisory board of a public-private coalition I once helped form. It wasn't a major seat, but it would have let him show up in press releases and start making decisions that looked impressive on paper. What they didn't know was that one of the newer board members, Andrea, was someone I'd introduced to Karen years ago, back when she was still hosting dinners and playing Kingmaker. Andrea had looked up to her once. Last fall, Andrea called me. Said she was getting pressure from someone on the outside about adding a name that wasn't ready. She didn't say who. I didn't ask. I just told her this. If you want to protect the board's integrity, don't give anyone a seat just because someone else thinks they're owed one. Travis's name was quietly removed from consideration 3 days later. They never figured out how that happened. That was the point. There were others. When Karen tried to steer one of her old nonprofits into a partnership with a city initiative, one she thought she could shape with her usual charm, I put in a quiet call to the director just to check in. I'd introduced Karen to that board back in 2013. I built her into that network. I knew the gatekeepers. I didn't badmouth her. I didn't have to. I just asked if they'd heard the name of a small, lesser-known community group in the area that had real numbers and better performance data. I gave them a contact. They went with that group instead. Karen lost her leverage, and her seat came up for review the following quarter. I never followed up, never gloated, just kept walking. By the time Travis's firm was removed from the shortlist for the regional expansion contract, I hadn't made a call in months. I didn't have to. The people I'd helped, the ones who came to me for quiet guidance, were now the ones making decisions. And I was the name they trusted to steer clear of flashy operators and thin credentials. I built a path for others, while Travis tried to shortcut his way through the same map. That final night, when I spoke at the expo and the applause landed on me instead of him, I saw it. That tiny moment where something broke. His clapping stopped after 2 slow motions. His eyes tracked me, not with hatred, but with disbelief. Like he was watching the ground shift and couldn't figure out when it started. Karen stood nearby, nodding along to the speech like she still belonged. But when it ended and she walked over to me, she didn't carry that same air anymore. She looked polished, like always, but smaller somehow. As if the weight of what she'd built was now too heavy for the man standing next to her to lift. She said, "You looked comfortable up there." Her smile twitched. Not a lot. Just enough to show the line didn't sit right in her mouth. Her voice caught on the word, comfortable. I nodded. Nothing more. She stood there for a second too long, like she was searching for a different version of me. One that might offer her a way back into relevance. But I wasn't that man anymore. I didn't need to be. And then came the moment I hadn't planned, but will never forget. The valet came out to check claim tickets. I'd already handed mine over. I was walking toward the curb when I heard it. "Sir, I'll need to see your ticket." A pause. "Sir." I glanced back. Travis stood there, empty-handed, patting his coat, checking his inside pockets, then his pants. His eyes moved too fast. His fingers fumbled. He looked down, then around, then back at Karen like maybe she'd fix it for him. She didn't. The valet repeated himself. Travis looked up, finally meeting the young man's eyes, and admitted he'd lost it. Not a scene, not a meltdown, just a delay. A quiet, unnecessary delay that left him standing in the warm air, unable to move forward until someone else helped. I didn't stop. I walked past them, got in my car, and left without a word. That was the final image I wanted. Not a confrontation, not a takedown. Just him standing outside, waiting for permission to leave, while I drove off without looking back. And Karen? She didn't call again. Not after that night. I think she understood. She'd left a man with roots and replaced him with one that had none. She'd gambled on charm over history, flash over foundation. And when the show ended, she was left holding the bill. If I ever tell the story, I'll keep it simple. I didn't destroy him. I didn't destroy her. I just made sure that when it came time to choose who belonged in the room, the right people remembered the quiet man who'd been there the whole time. And the ones who forgot? They're still outside, waiting.